Wisconsin's election maps have been at the center of intense debate over gerrymandering. What is gerrymandering? Simply put, this means district lines are drawn to protect politicians instead of reflecting the intent of the voters. Here's a quick look at the Fair Maps Coalition's proposed solution, an independent, citizen-led redistricting commission. This is a condensation of remarks presented to the CoCo Dems at its March 14th meeting. The presenter is Nicole Gabrail of the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. Also check out the accompanying article, which summarizes the presentation.
Because of our gerrymandered voting maps, it's been virtually impossible to hold our politicians accountable, because when safe seats are created for politicians, they no longer have to be held accountable to the needs of their constituents. Instead, they're focused on their own personal agenda and their party agenda. And we know that to fix this for good, we need to take that map drawing power away from politicians and give it to an independent redistricting commission in order to make sure that voting maps are fair for everyone and we can actually see the change that we all want to see in our state and get what we need. This quote comes from Cheryl Moranto, who is one of the members of the League of Women Voters Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee. And this quote is, "Gerrymandering is a bipartisan disease." And what we mean by gerrymandering as a bipartisan disease is that regardless of who is in the majority in our state, Democrat, Republican, or something else, all parties will gerrymander to entrench their political power if they are given that opportunity. Every single party will do that. And that is why we absolutely cannot give any power or any party that opportunity. An independent redistricting commission takes the ability to draw and pass the legislative maps and congressional maps, so all of our voting maps, out of the hands of our legislature and puts it into the hands of an independent citizen-led commission. And when we say that only 4 states have truly independent redistricting commissions written into their constitutions, what we mean by that is these 4 states have completely redirected the process away from the legislature and into the hands of their IRC. I get a lot of questions about, well, why isn't the Iowa model listed within these 4 states? Because that was kind of hailed as maybe the gold standard for IRCs. And the reason for that is the Iowa model is actually an advisory commission. So they're not a fully independent redistricting commission. The legislature is still drawing and passing the maps for the Iowa model, but they're receiving advice from that advisory IRC. So that's why we don't have the Iowa model listed here. While that system works great for Iowa, we just don't think it would work as well for Wisconsin, because Iowa does have a long history of bipartisan cooperation, and we just don't have that same history here in Wisconsin, which has been under kind of an extreme gerrymander for the past 2 decades. So when we list these 4 states, these are the ones that have truly independent redistricting commissions where the legislature is completely removed from the process. Just spoiler alert, before we go over the proposal development, none of this came out of thin air. We're drawing on best practices based on how we've seen other states kill their gerrymander. So I'm just going to give you a little background to get you guys up to speed, or maybe just refresh people's memories on how we ended up where we are now. Now let's go ahead and fast forward all the way to 2023. In August of 2023, Clark v. Weck, or Clark versus Wisconsin Election Commissions, was filed in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed to hear this case and ultimately declared our maps unconstitutional based on non-contiguity in December of that year. And for anyone that doesn't know, that hasn't heard the phrase non-contiguity, this basically means that there were various districts in our voting maps that were not actually physically connected. So you could have one district that had an island apart from itself, kind of placed in the middle of a completely different district. So it was not comprised of physically adjoining districts, or not all of the districts were physically connected. And that's what we mean by the territory was non-contiguous. And that is unconstitutional based on our state constitution, which is why those maps were ultimately overturned in 2024. So the state legislature ended up passing new maps that Governor Evers had submitted to the Supreme Court in the Clark case into law in February 2024, and we were blessed with a brand new day in Wisconsin. So this is the day that Governor Evers signed the new fairer maps into law. And the reason I say fairer maps and not just fair maps is because the thing that they wanted to do was use something called the least change approach. So they wanted to change our legislative maps as little as possible. So they're fairer, but still gerrymandered, not completely fair. And on top of that, the new maps that were implemented in 2024, that only applies to our legislative maps. It did not apply to our congressional maps. So our congressional maps are still actually being challenged in court. So how is the IRC going to function? Well, firstly, there are strict eligibility rules to ensure independence of the IRC. And there are various eligibility rules outlined in the draft proposal, but just to name a few, you have to be a registered voter. And to try to keep things as nonpartisan as possible, we don't want anyone who is a current politician, has been in office within a certain amount of years, is an employee of a politician, or is a direct family member of a politician. And additionally, you are ineligible to serve in the IRC if you have donated a certain amount of money over the last 5 years. I believe it's $10,000 of the last 5 years. If you've donated a certain amount of money to any political party, you are also ineligible to serve on the IRC. And these are the various mechanisms in place we have to keep the IRC as nonpartisan as possible. There's going to be a rigorous selection and hiring process, which first includes mailing out 10,000 applications at random and also posting online on all major hiring websites. The reason for the random 10,000 applications, it's based on what we've seen other states do. And the reason for this is because we want to be able to hit areas of the state where people might not have very stable internet access. Maybe they're more likely to take a look at their mail, or just people that, don't go online very often. So again, taking a pause now to say that although this was an incredibly momentous day in Wisconsin, this is not the end of the journey for us. I like to say that this was not the happily ever after, like right off into the sunset moment that some people made it out to seem. For example, I think I saw one article that was titled, the gerrymander in Wisconsin is slayed. And again, while this was a really, really momentous, wonderful day, I wouldn't say that our gerrymander was exactly slayed. And the reason for that is because without a nonpartisan redistricting process in place by the time 2030 rolls around, we could really end up exactly where we started.